Welcome to the podcast recording of Middle East AI News Live for Thursday, June 6th, 2024, brought to you by Carrington Malin, Marketing for an AI-First World. You're listening to my discussion with Andrew Forson, Head of Ventures and Investments at the Hashgraph Association. We're talking about the company's plans to form venture-building programs in Morocco, Qatar and Saudi Arabia to create hundreds of AI, deep tech and decentralized ledger technology startups.
Let's dive into today's topic. In today's Thursday Deep Dive, we're going to be talking about the Hashgraph Association's expansion in the Middle East and Africa and what that means for AI, Web3, and other deep tech startups. We'll touch on the Hashgraph Association's expansion into the region, plans for venture building studios in Morocco, Qatar's future digital asset venture studio, the new deep tech venture studio in Riyadh that was announced earlier in the year, and how that all maps to Hashgraph's Hedera decentralized public ledger. And I'm going to be joined by Andrew Forson from the Hashgraph Association, who is Head of Ventures and Investments, and who I believe is instrumental in driving the association's expansion. Andrew Forson is the Head of Ventures and Investments at the Hashgraph Association, the enterprise enablement and empowerment arm of the Hedera DLT ecosystem. And it's focused on innovation, expansion, and new investments. The Hashgraph Group is committed to fostering dynamic ecosystem for startups, enterprises, and government institutions worldwide, leveraging the advanced capabilities of Hedera Hashgraph. Hashgraph's decentralized ledger technologies are designed to develop enterprise-grade solutions and decentralized applications with a high level of security and efficiency. Trained as a financial and risk engineer, Andrew is a trust and estate practitioner, but also has run a number of software companies. And Andrew is driving the Hashgraph Association's global expansion and the creation of hundreds of new deep tech ventures encompassing areas such as Web3, AI, and other emerging technologies. Andrew Forson, thank you so much for joining us today on Middle East AI News Live.
Hi, Carrington. Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction and again for the opportunity to communicate with your great audience.
Welcome back. Thanks for making the time to join us because you had a busy time, haven't you?
It has been a busy period and it's been a productive period. And I'm very excited to be able to discuss many of the initiatives that we've embarked on over the last few months.
And I think most recently you were visiting Ireland, is that right?
That is right, actually. I believe last week we were the main sponsors behind Blockchain Ireland because our expansions and our activities are indeed global. In particular, in Europe, Ireland represents a wonderful market in terms of technology development, concentration of academic institutions, headquarters of IT firms, in particular Google and Facebook, rather Alphabet and Meta. And in terms of within the EU being English speaking and common law, it is also a great environment for us to be partnering with both government and enterprise.
So taking over the world then?
I think the whole objective is to really bring the best technologies to different parts of the world and to really enable technology developers to see how easy and efficient the integration of the Hedera distributed ledger can be in a range of technological initiatives. So when we're partnering with entities in Ireland, it enables us to promote the utilization of the distributed ledger in a broad range of technologies. I have had discussions in the past weeks with everything from AI companies to biomedical engineering companies to nanotechnology companies to stablecoins. And this really should indicate to people the power of distributed ledger technology and the fact that it is more or less the dial tone for the new generation of technologies that are being deployed, whether it be deep tech, fintech, DeepIn, it's there. And to bring this all into the context of the Middle East and the Middle East audience, the beauty of what we're doing is we are actually serving as a bridge for the best technologies in the best centers of the world to be able to bring maximal benefit to those Middle Eastern technology ecosystems that are seeking it. Many years ago, there would be a thing about technology where if you wanted the best software or the best version of a software, you pretty much had to be located in the US or North America. This is no longer the case. What we're finding is there are centers of excellence, and these centers of excellence are sharing the best in breed technology amongst themselves. So it's quite fitting that within weeks of having signed the digital assets agreement in Qatar, we then were able to move on to having discussions with significant players in Ireland. And one of the beautiful things here is many of these institutions and enterprises in Ireland have an interest in having the sharing of intellectual property and technology between Ireland and Saudi, between Ireland and Morocco, between Ireland and Qatar. All this does is it raises the level and quality of the technology being developed in all of the sectors. So I view that as a very positive development.
Interesting. Last time we had a chat, we talked a bit about the Hashgraph Association. So I think for the benefit of those that don't know, it's a non-profit organization, but it's also part of a group of entities that provide different services and benefits to the ecosystem. Could you just run us through what that is and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Hashgraph Association is the commercialization and enablement arm of the Hedera distributed ledger ecosystem. Hedera is actually a distributed ledger technology, a DLT for short. Most people, when they think of DLTs, are thinking of blockchain. Hedera is a DLT, but in actuality, the consensus algorithm, the way at which it proves the existence of data and the time at which data is lodged to the network, runs on a slightly different algorithm. For the engineers, they would say that the algorithm is very different. For lay people like myself, I would say the algorithm is slightly different, but it has significant performance benefits. And that algorithm was invented by Hedera's founder, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and it is called the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. So it's just a different way of assigning data to finality. And in the case of Hedera, one of our hallmarks is the high transactions per second that we're able to support. And something that a lot of people will not realize, the fact that Hedera itself as a DLT has lodged more transactions than any other public blockchain or DLT. I think it has probably logged more transactions than all of the other public blockchains and DLTs combined. But that I can't commit to, but I know that we have recently crossed our 50 billion transaction threshold. Within the Hedera ecosystem, there are a range of organizations. And broadly speaking, you have Hedera itself, which is just the distributed ledger. Then you have Swirlds Labs, which is primarily responsible for the engineering, maintenance, and innovations associated with the Hedera distributed ledger. You have the 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Foundation, which is a grant-giving organization that provides technology and innovation grants for technology that augments the Hedera distributed ledger. Then you have the Hashgraph Association and its associated private companies, the Hashgraph Group and Hashgraph Ventures. The Hashgraph Association is a not-for-profit commercialization, training, and enablement entity. The Hashgraph Group focuses on the delivery of what we like to call Hedera for Enterprise Technology Solutions. So we actually go out and work with small and medium enterprises, large enterprises, and government to help them implement Hedera in a way that solves their business problems. And then there is the Hashgraph Ventures division, of which I am honored and privileged to be the current head. And what we do with Hashgraph Ventures is we invest in those companies and support those companies that are leveraging the Hedera DLT in order to solve people's personal problems, business problems, technology problems in a way that emphasizes transaction volume and commercial traction for sustainability. So effectively, we're VCs that invest in Hedera-related projects.
Great, thanks. That was really useful. And just to be clear, this is not a whole ecosystem that's focused on startups by any means, is it? This is also weighs in heavily at an enterprise level.
That is absolutely correct, Carrington. Exactly. We support large enterprises, banks, stable coins, government projects at a very high level. Our approach is frankly system-wide. We view the Hedera distributed ledger and the technology that it provides as a way of accelerating and improving business performance and the human condition. From our perspective, if a government is seeking to do something better, and we have solutions within the Hedera ecosystem that can enable that, we're always eager to show what we have and help that government do the implementation using Hedera. What we found, however, is it's very important in a nascent industry. And even though we are often, those of us who live and work in the Web3 blockchain distributed ledger space, we feel like it's been here a long time. But the reality is applications have only been deployed on it effectively within the last 5 to 8 years. Blockchain and distributed ledger technology itself is at its most 10 to 15 years old. So this is a very young industry. And what you're going to find is that most of the innovation is actually coming from younger firms, entrepreneurial firms, startups that are willing to put all of their intellectual horsepower, all of their resources behind building novel solutions that solve business problems, but these solutions are centered around the distributed ledger technology. So right now, where we are at is akin to the early days of the internet. And I think because of that, we really try to support early growth companies and also entrepreneurship efforts within governments and larger organizations.
Before we go into the most recent agreements that you signed and initiatives that you're working on, let's just have a recap of what agreement was brought about with Saudi in February. So that was an agreement signed with the Ministry of Investment in Saudi Arabia to create a new deep tech venture studio in Riyadh with a quite an ambitious target of 500 new ventures to go through that studio in 5 years.
So deep tech is not purely Web3 is a part of deep tech. So by Web3, I'm talking about technologies that revolve around blockchain and distributed ledgers, decentralized ledgers. Deep tech also includes things like quantum computing, robotics, AI, nanotechnology, a range of technologies that generally require a longer time to deployment, a little bit more investment, and are often very much R&D focused. The Hashgraph Association's initiative with the Saudi government is to create an environment that would foster the development of these deep tech enterprises. But we also recognize that most of these deep tech enterprises, to a lesser or greater extent, will have an integration with DLT like Hedera. What we've done is we've invested considerable resources in the development of methodologies that enable startups to accelerate their products to market, regardless of whether it's Web3, quantum, or what have you. And in the interim, so between now and then, we've actually interviewed a number of projects, and we've had a strategic approach to how we've been onboarding projects to the Deep Tech Venture Studio in Saudi. In particular, we've been looking for some keystone projects. For instance, in the space of quantum, we have a soon to be announced a partnership with a company that focuses on post-quantum technology that will be being developed in partnership with Hedera, and that will leverage the Hedera distributed ledger technologies. Now, this keystone project will also provide technological support in the quantum space for the range of companies that would be being onboarded through the Deep Tech Venture Studio over the coming years. We're creating similar relationships, investment type partnerships with entities in robotics, with entities in AI in particular, so that what is going to happen is as projects are onboarded into the Deep Tech Venture Studio, there will be existing expertise there to help accelerate their particular mission, whether it be nanotech, quantum, AI, what have you. So we're looking at this as if you were building a pyramid. The first phase is to get foundational technologies with the understanding that Hedera is the foundational DLT. We're also in the midst of creating these foundational technological partnerships with industry leaders in their field in areas like quantum, like AI, like robotics. And in the process, we're also having discussions with small and medium enterprises that would like to be onboarded to this particular ecosystem. I think you mentioned one in the introduction, for instance, 𝗓𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗃 or SEAL-SQ, which is a decentralized physical infrastructure network technology provider. The benefit of that is the technology that they provide, which will be to some extent co-developed, or I'll use a better term. It will be leveraging the Hedera distributed ledger, but that technological infrastructure will therefore become available for other projects that are seeking to build within the Deep Tech Venture Studio in Saudi. But all the while we're building these strategic partnerships with certain larger organizations that will therefore be headquartered in Saudi, we're also always onboarding near startup, early stage companies that are also looking to deploy their technology within that space. So that's the methodology that we pretty much use in the early phases of all of these Venture Studio initiatives.
And this is a program that's open to local startups and also to startups globally that want to invest and become part of the Saudi ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think the weighting would probably be more towards local sourced startups. But whenever we're talking about the strategic stone technology providers, that is oftentimes international firms that we've encouraged to set up shop in Saudi. So where there's specific technology or a specific technology leader that we think could bring a great deal of benefit to whatever the deep tech or venture studio ecosystem is, oftentimes they're eager to come and access a new market. But in terms of the growth of the technology, the bulk of the enterprises that would be being serviced tend to be from within the region.
And applications for that program are open now, right?
They're absolutely open. As a matter of fact, of course, I can't reveal the entities, but I can tell you this week I've had significant interviews with no fewer than 3 Saudi-related startup projects or early stage projects. And I say early stage because while we encourage applications from everybody, we are really eager to see projects that will have a higher likelihood of success. And how does one determine if a project will have a higher likelihood of success? Generally, we're able to see some sense of a technology product that has either started to be designed or is in design. We're able, in the case of distributed ledger technologies, we're able to see transactions on chain, either on the main net or transactions that will likely come onto the main net in a short period within the next, say, 6 to 12 months. And we are also able to have a sense of commercial traction. It's not sufficient. In the case of applying for financial investment, it is insufficient to just say, I have an idea. What we like to see is a structured idea with proof of off-taker, potentially customers, potentially a government or business enterprise that would be willing to buy the service and are actually able to express that desire in writing that we could have evidence for. And we like to see definitive proof that the product exists, it works, there's demand.
And does that principle really apply across the different venture studios that you're involved in?
Yeah, this is quite universal because we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors to ensure that their capital is being deployed in a way that will actually generate a significant return. And that responsibility is not just to the private investors, it's also to the governments. There is not much point in us entering into a market and basically supporting projects that are not going to be sustainable. Sustainability builds economic growth. Sustainability creates employment. So whether we're looking at this from the perspective of a pure financial transaction or from the perspective of the betterment and growth of an ecosystem within a country, it is incumbent upon us to evaluate projects with the eye towards long-term success, financial sustainability, and technological innovation.
The Hashgraph Association signed an agreement with Qatar Financial Center Authority to set up a digital asset studio, I believe. Do you want to tell us about that?
Absolutely. I had the good fortune of visiting Qatar in mid-May, and Qatar is an absolutely stunning country, beautiful people. It was my first time there, and though I should be talking about the agreement right now, I'm going to be a little bit effusive, trying to figure out why more people don't talk about Qatar. It was an absolutely incredible experience, and the hospitality was second to none. The idea behind the Qatar Venture Studio is the development of a digital assets space. So this was done in partnership with the Financial Center, their Financial Services Authority. And I think it is actually a thematically very timely and well-positioned venture studio initiative. So digital assets are basically these assets that are represented electronically. Many of you probably have heard of the discussion of crypto tokens. Some of you have heard about Ethereum. And then that's what people commonly may associate with digital assets. But there are also more real world implications of digital assets. And these real world implications, sometimes they refer to them as real world assets or the tokenization of real world assets. What it does is enables the easier transfer of assets between institutions and people. And these assets can be everything from commodities to actual financial securities and financial instruments that have an electronic representation on chain. But there's an entire philosophy, there's an entire regulatory framework that is associated with these digital assets. The financial centers of the future, the next New York Stock Exchange, the next NASDAQ, the next Euronext, will likely be digital assets based. Why? Because settlement is so much faster. Transaction fees are negligible. The time to transact is faster, and the security, the ability to check the provenance of the assets is unmistakable. Technologically, it's actually a superior infrastructure. I think Qatar has made a very conscious decision to be a leader in this space. And dare I say it, I think they've selected the right technology partner in the form of Hashgraph Association and Hedera.
And that's just a recent deal. So that was May that was announced. How quickly do you plan to move with that?
When I was there, after announcing, we had already had 2 discussions with projects that would be onboarded to that platform. We will move quickly in this space, in large part because Qatar is so supportive. Just as Saudi has been supportive, just as Morocco has been incredibly supportive. And we'll also move quickly in this space because it's a focus area that I'm particularly familiar, comfortable with, and in love with. My background is in finance, so I have far more experience and knowledge in that space as compared to, say, quantum physics, where I know absolutely nothing. I can barely spell the word quantum.
Then perhaps you could comment on the digital assets regime that QFC has. How does that help this? And is that significantly different from other centers in the world?
I think in terms of I want to be careful to not speak about the intricacies of the legal and regulatory frameworks associated with digital assets, because I know that they are in the midst of exploring those things. They are in the midst of establishing a framework, but these are in large part political and regulatory decisions. And it is our role to provide the technological framework so that products will be ready to be deployed and take advantage of the regulatory regime once it has been fully established and fleshed out. I do know that is something that they are actively exploring, but that's okay, because globally, the entire state of the regulation and deployment of digital assets is largely in flux. In the US, the SE is basically regulating by enforcement. Recently, the SEC has authorized the spot Bitcoin ETF several months ago, and more recently, the examination of the spot Ether ETF has come into play. Whereas in Europe, from 2016, the world had its first spot Bitcoin ETF. Yet the US has a very active US stablecoin infrastructure in terms of USDC and USDT, whereas Europe, even though it has perhaps a more active crypto community in general from a regulatory perspective, the existence of Euro stablecoins are not yet mature. The reason why I bring this up is to show that there is basically a global movement to find regulatory frameworks to support the development and deployment of digital assets, but it is not yet mature. It is still in development, and where in one region there might be strength, in another region you might find weakness, and vice versa. What I particularly admire about Saudi, the UAE, Qatar, Oman, Morocco to an extent, is that they're actively researching the sorts of regulatory regimes that will comprise best practice in the rest of the world. They're learning from them, and they're trying to codify that into their own regulatory frameworks. So it's just a matter of time, but that doesn't mean the technology can't continue to develop. All of these governments have been highly supportive of bringing on technology providers and supporting the development of companies that build on these technologies within their borders. So there will be a nexus. There will be a point where the government's efforts to be nurturing of these technologies that develop these assets, like digital assets, financial instruments, and whatnot, it will meet up with the regulatory frameworks at around the right time. So there will be a significant explosion in region. And I think that explosion will create a lot of wealth.
So you touched on Morocco. I think maybe let's move on to discover what happened in Morocco and the new agreements that you've just announced. The first, I think, was the agreement with the Digital Development Agency in Morocco.
Yeah.
That was it. There was 3 agreements. There was Innovex, which is the innovation engine of Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, and then there was an agreement with 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗁𝗍𝒻 as well. Do you want to walk us through each of those? The scope is actually quite big amongst those agreements, isn't it? Because it goes from deep tech to DLT to sustainability with an enterprise leg, with training, with startup venture building. It sounds quite comprehensive.
That is correct. So I need to provide some context behind how the venture studios come to be. I'd be remiss to have this entire discussion without mentioning 2 people, our CEO, Kamal Yousefi, and our co-CEO, Mr. Stefan Dice. Now, these 2 individuals, are to describe them as working hard, that would be an understatement. They basically look at each market, define what is needed from an entire vertical integration to support the development of companies, projects, and industry in a way that almost makes it challenging for the projects to fail. Statistically, the outcomes of these venture studios tends to be far higher than a standard VC style investment. Now, our CEO Kamal is of Moroccan extraction. He's of Moroccan origin. And so Kamal and Stefan structured a venture studio ecosystem around an incredibly innovative university network. And I also want to add somebody else. Much of this was actually made possible by our country manager on the ground, Malika Lasri. And Malika in Morocco is somebody who, once she has the broader framework of what we're trying to achieve and has that understanding of what the Hashgraph Association has to offer, she's able to basically open all of these doors that enables Kamal and Stefan to come in, examine what it is we can offer within these markets, create a solution that involves both financial backing, academic support, technological support, and define a venture studio initiative. So these initial MOUs that have been established in Morocco are actually the starting point to define the specific structures that will be associated with 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗁, Innovex, and Agence de Développement Digital. So the idea here is, even though it's very expansive, it's actually based on the extensive background work that Malika has done in country, and it's based on the in-depth knowledge that Kamal has of his country. And it's also based on the business acumen and structure that Stefan has in terms of defining a venture studio system that he knows will work. So that's why, even though it's in one country, you'll notice that with each institution, the offering is slightly different. Now, I was in 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶 about 3 weeks ago, and when you visit the 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶 University, you'll know why. This has got to be one of the most outstanding technological universities in the world. The attention to detail, the equipment, the staffing, the team, the dedication, they have created a technological and training infrastructure whose impact I do not think will be fully felt for another 5 or 10 years. But by the time the rest of the world starts to recognize what 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶 is doing and how they do it, it'll almost be very hard to catch up. They are spinning off so many startups, and these startups are in turn supported by significant government entities, OCP, and these startups are actually supported by these different agencies. I really have to hand it in this regards to our country manager, because she's almost created a sub-ecosystem of helping these agencies speak together and enabling the Hedera technology to be an underpinning technology to support the development of these projects.
And there's the agreement with ADD. There's an enterprise element of that, isn't there?
That is correct. And as a matter of fact, in all of them, even though it may not be explicitly written, there is the assumption of moving the projects from education to university incubation to turning it into a viable small business to partnering with enterprise to partnering with government to growing so that it can become an export focused product. So you'll notice, I'm not sure if you've followed either the press releases, but basically that's the continuum. That's the model that Stefan and Kamal have defined. And Malika has been very effective in pulling all of these organizations together to communicate that model. With Agence de Développement, the areas of collaboration are mainly digital and technology catalysis, partnering with THA to explore smart government use cases. But the thing is, those smart government use cases, a lot of the technology will be coming from perhaps incubated projects, right? Because it's the startups that actually create the novel technological modules that can then go on display. In this case, THA is really serving in a facilitative role. Then afterwards, we will be providing facilitation and supportive actions for their 5 digital factory squads with the objective of designing tech-enabled digital transformation solutions for government. Then all of this is undergirded by training. So we have Hedera certified training programs. So we will make sure that it's not a matter of parachuting in technology, but it's also a matter of building capacity from the perspective of intellectual property capacity by training people as Hedera certified engineers, as blockchain engineers, so they can continue developing new technologies. And this is why all of these partnerships in partnership with the university is key, because it only works if you have strong local relationships with good academic institutions. And UM6P is definitely a good academic institution.
So it's obvious that there's a lot to this, and there's multiple programs, and there's also they're intertwined, and it affects many people, or potentially affects many people. How will this roll out practically? Is it going to take a little while to get that organized, or is that already done? And what does that mean in terms of entrepreneurs and startups who have a business they want to apply to for support?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So, for one, a lot of these initiatives, and let's focus on Morocco because Morocco is the latest and it's quite complex. We are partnering with premier institutions on the ground. For instance, one of the key partners in all this is Mr. 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗶𝗴𝗶, the CEO of UM6P Ventures. But UM6P Ventures is already very effective in venture building, right? So in an instance like that, we will, of course, provide technology support, training support, R&D support, but we have already started looking at co-investment opportunities. For instance, when I was there several weeks ago, in anticipation of this, I ended up initiating discussions with no fewer than two UM6P incubated projects for co-investment purposes. And this will continue. So it just means that we're able to have access to their wonderful cohorts of startups, but now we can also invest in partnership with the university. So we serve as a vector for crowding in outside capital and accelerating the adoption of Hedera in the process. So that's a prime example of how we have actually already started, but there the focus is on collaboration, co-investment, and research and development.
And as a startup in Morocco, are you able to apply now for these programs?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of pathways. So for one, each of these institutions, so Innovex, 6P Ventures, they have their approaches to inviting new projects and startups or incubating projects and startups within their ecosystem. For two, people can always communicate with us directly, and we could have two approaches. We can either speak with them directly, we can speak with them about an investment opportunity in partnership with one of these other institutions, or we can refer them directly to one of these institutions and partner with them in that way. But it just means that there are more options available to us to invest and participate and help.
Do you see synergies between these different systems and the programs that you're running? And when we see those, if they're there between Morocco and Qatar and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, Carrington, I think that's a really great question. And let's not forget Switzerland, because in all instances, the government of Switzerland, in particular Canton Schweiz, has been incredibly supportive and has basically provided us with the ability to support enterprises that are seeking to build and export in Europe and Switzerland as well. And I think there's a real strategic advantage there. So the question that you asked was synergies. And from the perspective of us growing and developing businesses, the biggest synergy is we will support global expansion and global sales. It is not uncommon. It has already happened. And I think, for instance, the 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗶𝗴𝗶 project is a great example of a project that was incubated, invested in out of Switzerland, but is now having traction in Saudi based on our partnerships and based on our venture studio initiatives there. We have had projects in Canada that are also based out of Canada that are also seeking to take advantage in that same way. And this is not going to stop there. We're going to see a lot of cross-pollination of technology out of Qatar, out of Morocco, into Switzerland, into Saudi, out of Saudi, into Switzerland. I know that's a very possible vector. So we're really creating environments for helping small companies that would otherwise not have access to international partners, where now, in a matter of one Zoom call and an email address, we can actually turn a small company into a small multinational. And this is actually happening today. It's happened this week. And we think that this will actually be accelerated because the Hedera ecosystem is global. So for us, if the technology is built in Morocco and we know of a client that may be a government in the UAE, if it's a good fit, it's a good fit. And they both know that these technologies have been built by certified Hedera engineers, have been supported by the Hashgraph Association, properly incubated perhaps by 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝘁 Ventures in partnership with THA. So the quality standards are high. They can trust how the technology was built and where the technology is coming from. And I think this is one of the real advantages of the broader venture studio, the broader global venture studio approach that, frankly, Kamal and Stefan have architected.
Interesting. And the partnership and the plans for Saudi Arabia announced this week. Would you like to touch on 𝗶𝗶𝗴𝗶 and what that means to IoT and to infrastructure?
You know what? This is really fantastic. And I think 𝗶𝗶𝗴𝗶 stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. But let's talk about at a high level what this is, because I really admire the CEO, 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝘁 of SEALSQ, and I admire their technology. And our team at THG, our engineering team led by our CTO, Mikhail and Misha Rune, they're actively working in partnership with SEALSQ on this platform. Without wishing to reveal too much, what I can say is they are using the Hedera distributed ledger, an IoT, which is Internet of Things, to enable hardware devices to speak to each other in a secure, traceable format. This is going to be revolutionary in terms of track and trace, in terms of inventory management, in terms of commercial household consumer utilization. And the beauty of this is they have already, under the leadership of their CEO, Carlos, they've already committed to global deployment. So they are developing the technology in partnership with different markets. This will enable hardware devices of varying standards being manufactured in different places to have cross-communication securely. It also means that hardware devices will no longer be geographically limited or necessarily limited by a certain network access. On a broader scale, you could actually have a decentralized network of physical items located throughout the world. I'm speaking without too many technological specifics because a lot of what they do is both R&D, and I also think it is always best whenever the actual company describes their specific use cases. But I'm close enough to the project to know that it's very impressive. And I, for one, am very glad that they are setting up effectively, are leveraging their connections in Saudi Arabia to ensure that this technology is not something that resides in a small box in one country, but will be able to be deployed internationally throughout the world in a range of different markets, so that everybody gets to start to build on these sorts of platforms early and quickly.
Very interesting. Sounds like it's got a lot of potential. We're pretty much out of time. Thank you so much for joining Thursday Deep Dive today.
I just want to say it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I think your audience can probably tell I start to get excited talking about the projects and the initiatives. So thank you for the opportunity very much, Carrington.
Thanks very much for joining us. Interesting stuff. And I'm sure we'll hear more news from the Hashgraph Association in the near future. I've been talking to Andrew Forson, Head of Ventures and Investments at the Hashgraph Association.
You've been listening to a recording of Middle East AI News Live for Thursday, June 7th, 2024, brought to you by Carrington Malin,